those who don't know, there was a mysterious fire set by a brainwashed Dutch communist who was executed. At least he was the scapegoat. And in a moment, we'll see Hitler's speech in response. But it was a pretext for the government to do away with parliamentary and particularly constitutional government. So this is the latter page of the Ermächtigungsgesetz, the Enabling Act of 1933. You can see von Hindenburg, the nominal head of state, the president, with his big pasty signature, and underneath the crabbed signature of Reichskanzler Adolf Hitler. And below that, the other signatures, the interior and foreign ministers and finance ministers. And this is the enabling law. It's only 5 articles long. I've stripped out the German specific titles so that British, US, Commonwealth viewers can understand more generically what's going on here. And I have to say that the US is actually closest in following this heretofore, because they already have executive orders and have had for decades. That's how the intelligence agencies have ruled. But look here, Article 1 says national statutes may, in addition to via constitutional means, also be issued by executive order. Article 2, laws enacted by the executive are allowed to be unconstitutional as long as they do not affect parliamentary bodies. My comment, this is the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty, and as long as you keep that supposed doctrine intact, you've got the MPs sweet and they won't rebel. And Article 2 ends, presidential prerogative remains unaffected. That, of course, is the royal prerogative in the British system or Commonwealth. Article 3, statutes enacted by executive order shall be issued by the Chancellor, that was Hitler, and announced in the Reich Gazette. So it was a fait accompli, you just read about it, you didn't debate it. They shall take effect on the day following their promulgation, except where a different date is specified. And then a whole 10 articles of Constitution will not apply to statutes enacted by executive order. Article 4, this is the top of the page visible, treaties with foreign states which relate to matters of statute law shall not be subject to ratification by the legislative bodies. So you've got the deep state acting internationally with no checks and balances.
Alex, sorry, Alex, can I just say, that sounds a bit similar to the Lancaster House treaties between Britain and France on defence.
Absolutely right, Mike. Absolutely right. The US actually, I had given them a criticism just now that they have executive orders, but they do have one thing up on us, which is that they have specific statute laws against the making of de facto diplomacy and treaties. They have bans on anyone who's not a diplomat doing that, not through the proper channels, which we don't. And so we have seen this happen in 2010, before and after the election of Cameron with the Franco-British Council. And then the article finishes that the executive shall issue the administrative law, which is an unlawful concept in the common law. It's a French Napoleonic idea of the government setting its own law from time to time. The executive shall issue the administrative law requisite for the performance of such treaties. So Deep State A and Deep State B fiddling and keeping up to date with each other without any parliamentary or public involvement. Article 5 says this law takes effect directly on the day of its promulgation. It shall elapse in 4 years' time, or if the present government is replaced by another. So that was the outcome of the Reichstag fire, the Enabling Act. I think people can see now I've stripped away the Reich language from it, what's going on in English-speaking common law terms or subversion of common law terms. And here we have Hitler's speech, which you might like to read, Mike. This is the crucial passage of him introducing the Ermächtigungsgesetz and basically telling parliamentarians their services were no longer required.
So Hitler said that in order to enable the government to discharge its duties, which are within the general scope of this framework, the government has had the Enabling Act tabled in Parliament by the Nazi Party. Some of the intended measures require constitutional supermajority. The measures which are being introduced or suppressed here are necessary. It would be contrary to the spirit of national nobility and would not suffice the intended objective if the government were to have to barter and beg on a case-by-case basis for the measures it wished to take. In reaching this decision, the government is not motivated by the intent to abolish Parliament as such. On the contrary, the government is going to retain Parliament in future, educate Parliament from time to time on government measures, or will, for certain purposes when felt appropriate, obtain parliamentary approval. And this resulted in cries of bravo. And he went on, yet government authority and therefore the discharging of duties of government would suffer if doubt could be allowed to arise among the people as to the stability of the new regime. And again, cries of quite so. And then he went on to say, above all, the government regards any future sitting of Parliament, further sitting of Parliament to be impossible in the current situation of profound national crisis. Alex, the thing that struck me about this, and I mean, some people may view what we're suggesting here as being quite an extreme thing. But the people that would be accusing us of being extremist in presenting this in the way that we are, I would argue might be the same people that have been complaining in the last few months about the so-called Henry VIII powers and the fact that the Tory government is trying to take powers unto itself without parliamentary approval. And it seems to me that those two positions, that the position that by putting this forward that the UK column is extremist on one hand and them complaining about Henry VIII powers on the other, those two positions are untenable.
And something else is untenable, Mike, and that is accusing us of making comparisons between Hitler and Nazism and the British government, because the British government has beaten us to it by a good 48 hours by insinuating on all channels that the Russian administration is just like the Nazi government. That was 2 news cycles ago. And yesterday, Russian public broadcasters already came out with a package on the evening news pointing to the British elite and aristocratic endorsement of Nazism in the 1930s, which was later conveniently covered up. So there is already the proof out there that the like Hitler comparison has first been made in this by the authorities in a classic attempt of projection. People know Anthony Sutton's book, or they should do, his books on Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, and another one called Wall Street and the Rise of Bolshevism. And there are interviews on YouTube to be found with him from the 70s and 80s, pointing out that the same financial interests and corporate interests that set up Hitler later transferred the techniques to particularly the US, but also Britain and Europe. So this idea of the bogeyman of anything you don't like being like Hitler is particularly wicked and intriguing, because it is a deliberate, Hitler was set up in a deliberate attempt to bring these measures into the West anyway.
Yeah. Alex, thank you for that brilliant analysis. Just before we move on to the propaganda side of what Theresa May is up to, what caught my mind in that speech was this gentle banter of government and Parliament. Well, Parliament, yes, should behave itself. The government is running the country, and of course the government is sort of very ill-defined. It's this deep power base that we can't really get to grips with. We think we've got elected members operating to help govern the country in Parliament, but in fact what we are now starting to see in UK is that is just a puppet show, and we've got these dark actors working in warm offices with closed doors elsewhere, part of the Privy Council, part of the Cabinet Office, where the state and the government is really taking place. This is unbelievably sinister stuff.